Harijji, you can start the session with the
Sir, we can we can start the session.
yes, sir, with the institute motto, sir.
य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति कामं 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 कामपुरुषो पुरुषो निर्विमाणः निर्विमाणः तदेव शुक्रं तद्ब्रह्मा तद्ब्रह्मा तदेवामृतमुच्यते तस्मिन् लोकः शतः सर्वे तदूनात्यपि कश्चन एतद्द्वैता 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 एतद्द्वैता
So, Abhishek, should we start now?
Just a minute, sir.
All right.
There will be a keynote address from the chairman.
Sure,
Sir.
sure.
Then we will start, sir.
Perfect.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Am I audible, Abhishek ji?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You are audible, sir.
Okay, so respected faculty for the session, Advocate Rachit Jain ji from Delhi, the coordinator for the entire series, C. Abhishek Chopra, Advocate Manish ji Jain, I can also see you here, sir, and all the participants for this wonderful series. First of all, I think let me tell you that we have been getting very good responses from this entire series. Thank you, Abhishek bhai, Rahul bhai, who have designed the entire series on customs. And I'm sure we are going to have a session like this again during the year, because it's something which is happening for the first time, and I think we got a very good response on this. Coming to today's topic, thank you so much, sir, Rachit ji, for agreeing to come on a topic which is on valuation. I'm sure Abhishek ji will going to throw more light on that. I'm not a GST or a customs person, but thank you so much for agreeing to come virtually. And maybe once things get better soon, we'll have a physical session on customs, entire series on customs soon at branch, maybe after July, August, whenever the time is fine. So thank you once again, and to all the participants, you can send us your feedback, you can suggest your suggestions, anything that you want for us to have at branch. We're always open to that. So thank you once again. And I just want to mention one thing. I think though it's a different forum, but we are going to have a 7-day workshop on bank audits. So it's a very specifically designed workshop wherein we'll be dealing with each and every aspect of bank branch audit in a separate day. So 7 different days. Tomorrow we are going to launch it from 19th to 28th of March. 8 days we're going to have a continuous session on bank branch audit. With this, I would once again thank you all, and now over to you, Abhishek ji.
Now I would like to introduce today's faculty, Shri Rachit Jain sir. Sir is BA LLB and associated with India's leading tax firm, Lakshmi Kumar and Sridharan, based at Delhi and having offices pan India. Sir is heading custom litigation team of Delhi head office, and sir is regularly appearing before State DGFT Development Commissioner, SEZ and Custom Department. And sir is regularly handling the investigation cases conducted by DRI, SIB, Customs on day-to-day basis. And sir is day-to-day facing the practical litigations, especially on the valuations. Valuations, I will tell you today's topic is valuation only. So sir will throw the light on valuation. In any forum, in any tax law, the valuation is an important and core concept, because something goes wrong with valuation, then the whole stake the company will be in trouble. So the company need to take seriously, and we as a professional need to advise our client on this aspect. So sir, our client or we professionals, we are not very used to customs. The purpose of this series is to equip our consultants, our fraternity with this law. And it is a new avenue, and we want your experience to share with all of us, and so that we can handle our client and a new avenue of practice develop for all the members. With these words, I request today's faculty Rachit Jain sir to take this session forward. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Abhishek ji. Thank you, Bharat ji, for the introduction. It's my pleasure to be associated with the organization and your chapter specifically. When Manish came up with this idea, I thought it will be a great opportunity for us to collaborate, not just for these sessions, but also professionally going forward and help each other, assisting our clients in the matters which they are facing. And wherever we can provide our help, we'll be more than glad to do it. As you rightly mentioned, Abhishek ji, customs valuation is one topic which has always been in limelight by the department, because it has a direct implication on the duty liabilities which an importer is supposed to discharge. This has also been a hot topic for litigation for all these years, primarily because of the provisions which relate to not just computations of duties, etc., but also with regard to the includability of various other elements, which I will be discussing in the course of our session. And in my experience, I've seen that there are a lot of importers who are not even aware that they are supposed to include certain components in the value of imported goods, a complete bona fide mistake on their part, but which unfortunately lands them in long drawn litigation before courts. So rather than spending their time and focusing on business, they end up entering into these unwarranted litigations, I would call. So though as professionals, on a lighter note, I would say it's good for us. But as a company or as an individual or as an importer, it's definitely not something which any importer would desire to get into. With this brief background, I'll start with the presentation today. So if Abhishek ji, can you just confirm if you're able to see my screen so that I'll continue accordingly? So we'll start with the overview of customs valuation, and we'll discuss broadly what is the concept of transaction value, how it has evolved over a period of time, and what exactly does it mean when it comes to customs valuation. As far as the evolution of customs valuation is concerned, there have been over a period of time diverse systems of customs valuation. As we all know, when it comes to customs law, there are a lot of practices which are uniform across the globe amongst different countries. And this is primarily to ensure that the treatment which we give to any set of goods which are coming into India and exported by any other country, when we export our goods, the same treatment is given. So there has been a mutuality in terms of not just treatment of goods, but also certain aspects like classification. So as we know, world over, all the member nations of World Customs Organization, they have their HSN aligned at 6-digit level, which ensures that goods get same treatment in different countries, irrespective of from where they are originating, irrespective of from where they are ultimately exported and imported into. Similarly, when it comes to valuation also, there was a desire to have a uniform practice and procedure of valuation across different nations, again to ensure the same thing, that there is parity amongst different countries with regard to import of goods. Obviously, as we know that any concept which has to have a universal acceptability will take its own time for development. There have been a lot of trials and errors because of which the concept has developed over a period of time, and now ultimately with the signing of Article 7 GATT in 1994, the concept of valuation has stabilized when it comes to customs laws. So I've given a brief introduction as to what all attempts have been made in the past before by different forums with regard to customs valuation. How can there be a uniform formula for determining value of imported goods? So it started with the League of Nations, Thereafter, it moved to Article 7 in 1947, the first Geneva round when it was conducted. After that, there was a European Customs Union study group in Brussels, which ultimately resulted in the Brussels definition of value. We'll be discussing this portion also specifically in the subsequent slides. There were some defects in this concept of Brussels definition of value. Thereafter, it was again discussed in the Tokyo round, and finally in 1994, when GATT was signed at the WTO and India was also a member nation, India also became a signatory to GATT. Article 7 of GATT specifically dealt with valuation as to how goods which are being imported must be valued. When it comes to the Indian legal framework, there has been a development over a period of time. We know that Customs Act 1962 came into being, but before that, there was Sea Customs Act, which dealt with the concept of valuation in section 30, which gave a very, very vague concept of real value. That is, if the goods are imported and they are to be valued, they should be valued at the real value. It was a very broad concept, and it was defined as the wholesale cash price less discounts which are offered. Obviously, when it comes to these concepts, it brought in a lot of subjectivity, and therefore it was not considered as one of the desired modes of valuation. Thereafter, we moved on to the Brussels definition of value, which we followed until 2007, which is basically a deemed or a notional concept. And finally, in 2007, we moved to the concept of transaction value by the amendment in section 14 to the Customs Act, which primarily deals with the valuation aspects. As you all would be aware, we also have a separate set of rules called the Customs Valuation Rules 2007, which gives or lay down the broad aspects and specific pointers with regard to valuation of imported goods. The Brussels definition of value, as I was referring to, it said that the value of the imported goods shall be the normal market price, that is, price that a good would fetch in an open market between an unrelated buyer and seller. Now, because the definition was so broadly worded, it brought in a lot of subjectivity as to how do you determine that a particular set of goods would fetch what price in an open market. What exactly is open market? How much price can the goods fetch? Became a question of it brought in a lot of subjectivity, and therefore it was not desired. At the same time, there was some process with regard to which certain adjustments could be made in the so-called normal market price, which is specifically highlighted in point 2. That is, the factual deviations which were there in the declared value, if they were higher than the listed price. So VDV basically came up with a list of price of different goods, and if there was a variation, that is whatever is higher, that will be taken into account. But if their prices are low, then what is there in the list, then you would at the most be allowed a reduction of 10%. Now, because of this cap, if I am a bigger importer of goods, if because of my quantity which I am ordering, if I am able to get a competitive advantage and I am able to get a better price from the supplier, despite that, whatever my actual price is, I would still be bound to follow another value which is determined, and which basically led to discarding of this concept of Brussels definition of value. After that, as I mentioned, Article 7 of GATT, which was introduced, it basically had 3 motives or the objectives, as we call them, to determine how value is to be computed. The basic concept was the value should be based on the actual value of imported merchandise. So irrespective of what others are importing at, irrespective of the competitors are either exporting from India, etc. is concerned, whatever value a buyer is paying to the seller, the good should be valued accordingly. It was the thumb rule, as we can call it. And for some reason, if actual value is not ascertainable, then what is the nearest ascertainable value? So for example, if you are not purchasing the goods, there is no sale purchase transaction between two parties. But for instance, if you are taking goods on lease basis, then there is no actual value which is present. In such a situation, you try and determine what is the nearest ascertainable equivalent of the value for the very same goods if they are being imported. And on the basis of this, stability was sought to be introduced with regard to the methods and basis of valuation. This was basically the concept at the end of the day would essentially mean that there has to be objectivity when it comes to valuation. It should not be the case that if an importer A is importing because of certain reasons, he should be given or allowed to import at a different price. But when the very same goods are imported by somebody else, the price could be different. So the idea was to bring in objectivity and to take away the discretionary power from the customs officer so that they don't raise disputes on each and every aspect whenever goods are being imported. If a lot of discretion is conferred on the officers, we all know, irrespective of what the subject is, the moment you give discretionary powers to the department, they will exercise that discretion and the matter would land in litigation, or it may lead to increased corruption also. So to address those issues, it was important to bring in more objectivity when it comes to rules, but at the same time, it was meant to ensure that the importers are requested or liable to be paying duties only on the values which the goods actually are imported at. And therefore, Section 14, when it was amended in 2007, the concept of transaction value was introduced. I have broken down the definition of transaction value in certain bullets, which I think are very, very important for us to understand and makes it easy also for us to understand. So the definition goes like: transaction value shall be the price actually paid or payable for the goods. So irrespective of the fact whether you have already made the payment at the time of importation or you are going to make it in future, that will be the price which will be considered. And in terms of the exchange rate, today, as we all know, that customs department would issue notifications giving the exchange rate of the foreign currency, which is to be considered. So if you're importing goods, you would be importing them in foreign currency. It could be dollars, it could be euros, it could be pounds, it could be anything for that matter. Now, how and what rate should be considered for converting that foreign currency into INR for the purpose of duty payment also became an issue, because the importer would say that I imported goods on X day on which this was the rate. Whereas if the duty is paid, say 4 days later, 5 days later, then which exchange rate should be taken? So to take care and resolve this issue, Customs Department comes up with a monthly notification which will provide exchange rate, and whatever bills of entry are filed by the importers, the prevalent exchange rate at that point in time of filing the bill of entry is taken into account to ensure there is uniformity when it comes to exchange rate. So price actually paid or payable for the goods when they are sold for export to India, the price which this price when sold for export to India essentially means that the price which the buyer is charging from the seller, so the seller is charging from the buyer on the basis of which he has agreed to export the goods to India, and the goods, the entire value should also include whatever costs which are incurred for delivery of the goods at the time and place of importation, that is India. So because of these aspects of valuation, as far as India is concerned, we charge customs duty, or India charges customs duty on CIF value of the goods, even if the goods are sold on FOB basis or ex-factory basis by the supplier. Even if the buyer is taking delivery of the goods in the country of exportation, by virtue of these clauses, that is, when sold for export to India, for delivery at the time and place of importation, the price has to be, or the value has to be converted to a CIF price, and thereafter customs duties are to be discharged on that accordingly. Now, apart from these requirements, transaction value becomes an acceptable price only and only when the buyers and seller are unrelated. Because the moment there is a relationship between the buyer and seller, there is a likelihood that the prices could be influenced because of the relationship. And once the prices are influenced by the relationship, then obviously they will not be considered as sacrosanct. So in case of related parties, we have a separate procedure of how that value has to be determined when import and export is between related persons. We have a separate division in Customs Department called the Special Valuation Branch, before whom you are supposed to go and make submissions, justify how the prices are at arm's length price, and accordingly, once it is accepted, the importer would be allowed to clear goods on the basis of that so-called arm's length price. Though it does not directly relate to that issue, but being tax professionals, according to us, this concept of customs valuation is actually at loggerheads with the concept of transfer pricing. As far as customs is concerned, the customs department would want to enhance and increase the prices at the time of importation. This helps them in getting more revenue for the country. But when it comes to income tax department, they would want a lower transfer price so that lesser expenses can be booked and lesser amounts are to be sent out of India. So because of this so-called conflict between the transfer price and the customs valuation, we have seen in a lot of matters over a period of time that different authorities would take different stands, and a same assessee importing the very same set of goods may end up having a different transfer price as compared to the value which is to be declared before the customs department. So it becomes very, very important for us to take or create a position whereby you balance both situations so as to ensure that either of the department should not take this as a basis to question your value tomorrow. Whatever is your TP, the department should not, customs department should not rely on your TP price, transfer price, to say that you are undervaluing or overvaluing your goods. And it can happen vice versa. And as we all know today, there is a lot of interaction between the customs department, the income tax department. There are reports which are generated on regular basis. In fact, a lot of activities have also been outsourced by these departments, wherein they would analyze the data, point out what are the inconsistencies between the data which is there for income tax purposes, whatever is the data which is there for customs purposes, compare. Recently, we came across a show cause notice to a client which says that as far as customs is concerned, according to customs data, you have paid this much amount of duty, whereas when it comes to your income tax record, you have paid lesser amount of duty. So why there is this inconsistency between your records and the records of the customs department? So we'll have to keep in mind that with integration of different departments amongst themselves over a period of time and gradually it is increasing, it becomes very important for us to strike a balance between these two things. You can't be working in isolation that for income tax I'll take a different stand altogether, whereas when it comes to customs I'll take a different stand. No, that inconsistency will be used by the department against you to trap you. And the last one, of course, being that the price should be the sole consideration in the sale. That is, there should not be any other form of consideration between two parties, because otherwise it will undermine the concept of transaction value and your price would also be influenced by that. We'll be discussing these aspects separately also. As I was mentioning, this amendment was brought out in 2007 because there was a dichotomy between the transaction value as it was there in the concept of in section 14 as it appeared earlier. The previous definition, as I was mentioning, was based on the Brussels definition of value, whereas when it came to customs valuation rules, which are supposed to implement section 14 of the Customs Act, that were based on transaction value. So there was an inherent conflict between these two provisions, and therefore the definition was amended in 2007. Now, after the amendment of the definition, as we saw, what are the different ingredients of the definition? So we have different set of rules, that is customs valuation rules, wherein there are different rules which deal with various aspects of valuation. Rule 3 being the most important rule. So Rule 3 describes that what is price actually paid or payable. It says that the price actually paid or payable should be the total, very, very important to note here, total payment made or to be made by the buyer to or for the benefit of the seller of the imported goods. So it's not necessary one that you have already paid for the goods at the time of importation. It could be a deferred payment, it could be in future also. And it is also not necessary that you'll be paying directly to the seller of the goods. You could be paying to somebody else also on the behest of the seller to settle one of his claims. In that case also, that value should be considered as price actually paid or payable. And it should necessarily include all payments made as condition of sale of imported goods by the buyer to the seller. It's a very, very important concept, and there is a lot of litigation today, in fact, since times immemorial, going on this concept of condition of sale. It becomes very important and relevant also for the purpose of Rule 10, which we will be discussing as to what exactly does a condition of sale means. But just to introduce the concept, a condition of sale essentially means that unless and until that condition is satisfied by the buyer, the seller would not agree to sell the goods to the buyer. If there is any such stipulation, then that stipulation would be considered as a condition of sale. Now, when sold for export to the country of importation, why this was required was to ensure that whatever expenses are otherwise incurred till the time the goods land at the customs frontier or landmass of India, all those expenses are to be included, be it cost, be it your insurance, be it your freight, and therefore we charge, as I mentioned earlier, the customs duties are to be discharged on CIF basis because of this reason. Apart from this transaction value, there are certain adjustments also which are to be made as per Rule 10 of the valuation rules. I was referring to various components which are to be included in the transaction value to determine what is the assessable value for the purposes of duty payment. And we'll look into what are these so-called components which are there in Rule 10. Price actually paid or payable, as I was mentioning, it could be in form of money, it could be a negotiable instrument. So apart from the rules, that is from Rule 1 to Rule 12, the custom valuation rule also has a last rule which says that there is something called an interpretative notes which are annexed to the custom valuation rules. These notes are nothing but an elaboration on what exactly does a particular rule mean. And according to the Rule 14, Rule 13, which is there in the valuation rules, these rules also have the same sanctity as that of a provision of law. So the rules themselves provide a description or an elaboration as to what exactly is the meaning of a particular rule. And it will also give examples in certain cases. So if Rule 3 is there, then there are interpretive notes to Rule 3, which would explain what exactly is the meaning of the provision which is contained in Rule 3, and it's for ease of reference and to avoid any confusion. So interpretive notes to Rule 3 gives this example that what price actually paid or payable would mean the money or letters of credit or negotiable instruments on the basis of which payments are going to be made. It also gives another example in form of a settlement by the buyer of the debt owned by the seller to the buyer or any third party. So that is, if I am a purchaser, I am importing goods from a seller X, and seller X owes any amount to any other person. If I make good that payment to the third party, then that also would be considered as price actually paid or payable. I can't take an argument that because I did not pay that amount to the seller of the goods, therefore it should not be considered for purpose of payment of customs duty. Now there are certain conditions which are to be fulfilled for acceptance of transaction value. That is, in what all cases the transaction value would be considered as untainted, or it is considered as not influenced by any conditions or stipulation. One of the requirements, a major one, of course, is that there should not be any restriction on how the buyer is going to use or dispose the goods after they have been imported by them. So if the seller says that I will put a restriction on you with regard to how you are going to sell the goods, at what price you are going to sell the goods, to whom you are going to sell the goods, in that case, the rules say that transaction value is not the sole consideration, because there are certain stipulations which are attached to the goods which can influence the valuation, and therefore transaction value would be rejected in that case. However, there are certain exceptions which are also listed. So for example, if the Indian law stipulates that there are some restrictions which are to be followed by the goods at the time of importation, then they will not be hit by this so-called restriction with regard to disposition or use. For example, if at the time of importation, we have to follow with the package commodity rules under the provisions of legal metrology, imported goods are supposed to bear a label as to what is the MRP of the goods, who is the importer on record, etc. Rule 6 label is there on the goods. A requirement of that nature, or if there is a licensing requirement under the law, that's the most important part, that these requirements should come from any of the domestic laws in India. And if there is any such stipulation, it will not be considered as a restriction on disposition or use of the goods. Second exception which is there is limiting the geographical area in which the goods may be resold. So if the seller restricts that the buyer should sell the goods within a specified territory in India, he may have multiple distributors appointed in India. I could be a distributor for northern zone, whereas somebody else could be a distributor for southern zone. in that case, a stipulation with regard to defining a geographical area within which goods are to be sold will not be considered as a restriction on the disposition of goods, because it's a common business practice. So the usual business practices also find concurrence in these rules, and due exceptions have been made considering those factors here. And apart from these two, the third or the generic condition which is there is that any such restriction which does not substantially affect the value of the goods, because that is the ultimate objective of these rules, that anything and everything which affects your value should be taken into consideration. But if there are certain restrictions which do not affect the value of the goods, then the seller may still impose those restrictions. An example of that could be that the buyer should not sell or exhibit any goods before they are launched in India. It's just an example to give a sense of what is something. So if there is a restriction of that nature, that is not going to have an impact on the value of the goods. Therefore, a restriction of this nature is still allowed under law. Now, there was a reference, it's important to refer to a judgment of Technova Imaging, wherein the tribunal held that the discounts which are given by the suppliers to the importers on the sole ground that the goods are to be displayed for in an exhibition, whether such discounts can be considered as acceptable discounts so as to reduce the value or not, was the question before the tribunal, wherein the tribunal held that these discounts are not the usual discounts and therefore they will not be allowed. So the matter was decided against the SSC in this particular case. Continuing on the conditions for acceptance of the transaction value which is declared, the second stipulation is that the sale or the price must not be subject to condition consideration for which a value cannot be determined in respect of the goods which are to be valued. So there could be the instances which we saw earlier were with regard to possibility of giving a number or a value to the conditions. There could be certain conditions because of which you can't really attribute a value to that condition. So for instance, if the price of the imported goods are dependent on purchase of other goods in specified quantities, the seller puts a condition that I'll sell you goods X at 100 rupees, provided you buy goods Y from me in a specified quantity, then I'll give you a discount or a reduced price. Now, because of this so-called stipulation for purchasing another set of goods, it's not possible to determine as to how much quantity discount has been given, how much has not been given. And therefore, any such conditions or consideration which cannot be given a value or for which a value cannot be determined, in cases where there are such conditions exist, then the department will not accept your transaction value and it will be rejected. Will resort to thereafter they will resort to other rules of valuation, which we'll see in a short span of time as to what are the alternative methods. Now, apart from this, there is another example that the price of the imported goods is dependent on price of other goods supplied by the buyer to the seller. So I will sell you goods X, that is the importer will be getting goods X from the purchaser at a particular value if the importer is exporting some goods to the seller at a different price. So wherever there is any possibility of the value of imported goods getting affected because of some incidental or ancillary or a parallel transaction, in that case, Customs Department would reject your transaction value because the transaction value will not reflect the actual price of the goods. That's very important. If there is any consideration which plays into determination of these prices, irrespective of the fact that whether the parties are related or not, but if there is any condition which according to them could possibly influence the valuation, in those cases, the values would definitely be rejected. Now, there are certain exclusions, that is what costs, etc., which are not to be included in the value for payment of the payment of customs duties. There are certain exclusions, and those exclusions would primarily be in the nature of post-importation expenditure, as we call them. That is, once the goods have landed in India, whatever expenses are incurred on those goods, even if they are to be paid to the seller of the goods, they would be considered as post-importation expenditure and they will be excluded for the value purposes. So the value of the imported goods shall not include these charges. So for example, if I am importing a plant or a machinery, a complete plant is being imported by me. I import the plant, I pay the price for the plant, but apart from the plant, I also engage the same seller for erection or construction of that plant or assembling of that plant in India, or to provide me technical assistance with regard to that plant for running the plant on a continuous basis. Now, because these charges are being made by me after importation of the goods in India, and as we saw in the definition of transaction value, the requirement is to pay duty on the amount which is paid or payable by the seller, by the buyer to the seller at the time and place of importation of goods. So that phrase becomes relevant here. At the time and place of importation is the customs frontier or border of India. But because these charges relate to those activities or services which are to be provided post importation, they will not be included in the for determining the value. Similarly, the cost which is for transportation after importation of goods into India. So for example, if I import the goods at Nhava Sheva port, and from Nhava Sheva the goods are to be transported to my factory based in Delhi, then whatever freight I am incurring for this purpose will not be included in the customs value, because the goods have already crossed the customs frontier in Nhava Sheva. Bill of entry has been filed and assessed there, and whatever expenditure I have included till the time goods land at Nhava Sheva alone shall be included in the assessable value. Of course, whatever duties and taxes which are paid by me after importation of goods, they would definitely not be included. So these exclusions are specifically mentioned again in the interpretive notes to Rule 3, and therefore interpretive notes become very, very important for these purposes. With regard to the conditions, as we are discussing, another point which we saw was that the buyer and the seller should not be related, because the moment there is a relationship, there is an assumption that the price would be influenced because of the relationship. So it takes us to the question as to who would be considered as related persons. There are 8 situations which are contemplated in Rule 2.2 of the Customs Valuation Rules, which is essentially the definition clause of the valuation rules. And they list down these 8 categories. I'll just quickly run through these categories. That 2 persons, so it covers the phrase which is used as related person. A person, of course, is a very wide term which can include a company, an individual, partnership, etc., etc. So legal or juristic person as well as natural persons, both are covered within the definition. And we can see that different clauses will either relate to the individuals or the natural persons, or they could also relate to juristic persons. So for instance, that they should not be officers or directors in one another's business. This is obviously meant for individuals, because only individuals can be officers or directors. They are legally recognized partners in India. As far as this clause is concerned, according to me, this applies to individuals as also legal entities, because 2 companies can also come together and make a partnership. The third clause is that when buyer and seller would be considered as related is that when they are employer and employee, or any person directly or indirectly owns, controls, or hold 5% or more of outstanding voting stock or shares of both of them. That is, a third party has 5% or more outstanding voting rights or shares, and because of which it indirectly controls or holds. So if a third party is controlling the buyer and the seller, then the buyer and seller in that case would also be considered as related person, because that third person is in a position to exercise restraint or affect the value of the goods between those 2 parties over whom this third person is exercising control. If one of them directly or indirectly controls, obviously there are chances that they can influence price, and therefore they'll be considered as related person, and in that case the transaction value will not be accepted. Even in those situations, clause 6, wherein both of them are directly or indirectly controlled by a third person, or together they directly or indirectly control a third person. So even if buyer and seller together control a third party, they would still be considered as related. And again, coming back to individuals, they are members of the same family. In no other case, relationship will arise except for these situations. So if your relationship does not specifically fall under any of these criteria, then the parties would not be considered as related parties. So, for example, a sole distributor is appointed by the exporter in India, and he is the distributor for the entire country. Customs may say that because you are the sole distributor of these goods in India, you are the only one who's importing, and because of the agreement between you and the seller of the goods, there is a likelihood that he can control you because you are procuring goods only from him and you are the only one selling goods in India. The Customs Department has in the past alleged that in cases of sole distributorship specifically, the parties would be considered as related, but there have been various decisions and dispute on this issue, and the Supreme Court has finally held that only because a person is appointed as a sole distributor, he will not be considered as a related person unless the sole distributor and the supplier of the goods also fall under any of these 8 criteria. If they don't, then they'll not be considered as a related person, and the price will not be considered to have been influenced by the so-called relationship. Of course, if the goods are related, if the goods are imported from a related person, then we'll have to follow Rule 3.3, which provides for how goods are to be determined in case there is a relationship between 2 parties. Now, this was broadly the concept of transaction value and how and what all components are existing in the definition of transaction value, and where related parties are involved, what is the definition of related parties. Now, coming to the more important part wherein a lot of litigation actually arise is, apart from the price which is to be paid by the buyer to the seller, what are the other components which the Customs Department in certain cases seek to include and enhance the value, and accordingly make the importer liable to pay higher amount of customs duties. So that's very important to know as to what all other components which can be loaded on to the transaction value for the purpose of paying higher duty, and what are the exclusions which cannot be made or loaded onto the transaction value. Apart from that, if the transaction value method fails, that is, if the value which is declared by the importer is not acceptable by the department as a transaction value, then what are the options available in terms of valuation rules to see how value is to be determined for the purpose of payment of customs duties. Before we go on to the specifics of those inclusions and exclusions, Rule 10 primarily deals with inclusions and exclusion. It also says very specifically that additions to the transaction value must be done on the basis of objective and quantifiable data. This is very, very important, because if the Customs Department want to include any of those components which we are going to deal with in the value of goods, it can't be an abstract. It can't be in air. There has to be some basis for it. The data should be quantifiable, more importantly, because unless you quantify the data, how will you enhance it? How will you add it to the value of imported goods and accordingly increase the value of goods? And the most important clause, that is Rule 10.4, it very specifically says that only and only the additions which are listed in Rule 10 alone can be made in the value of imported goods. No other addition which fall within the definition or within the realm of Rule 10.4 or Rule 10 rather, they can be included in the transaction value. I'll give you a very simple example. We dealt with this matter this week only, in fact, sorry, last week, with regard to valuation of air turbine fuel, or ATF as we call it. So for a lot of airline companies. So there are provisions in customs laws which says that if Indigo, for example, is taking a flight, Indigo takes her passengers out of India, it will obviously have to have fuel. It will fuel its tank, it will go out. It may be required to refuel in the country outside India. Say, for example, it has gone to UK. So it will refuel the tank in London. It comes back, and whatever is the quantity of fuel which is left over in the tank after the flight has landed in India, how would you value those goods? Are you liable to pay any duty on those goods? Is the issue which we argued last week before the larger bench of tribunal. And I'll tell you why that question arose in a minute. there are certain additions which are very specifically provided for when it comes to the transaction value, that is the selling commission or the brokerage is to be included in the value of imported goods, because this amount relates to export of goods to India. And as we saw in the definition of transaction value, whatever expenses are incurred at the time and till the time the goods are landing into India, because it said at the time and place of importation, are to be included. So if any selling commission is there or any brokerage is there, it is to be included. It's important to note that no buying commission is required to be included, because the buyer has incurred that amount. Apart from that, if the cost of the container is incurred by the buyer, then obviously it will have to be included. But if the containers are of, say, reusable nature, they are to be exported back and the buyer is not continuing to use those containers, etc., or they have been assessed to duty separately as goods in the bill of entry itself, then obviously their value will not be included. The cost of packing, whatever is required, is for the export of goods to India. Obviously, that will liable to be added. Usually, if buyer is selling goods to the seller to the buyer in India, when the seller is selling the goods, then obviously whatever price he is charging, he will have all these components. However, in certain cases, if for example, if I take delivery of goods outside India, I take ex-factory delivery, and I choose to transport the goods on my own in India for my own factory, for my own manufacturing purposes, then in that case, whatever cost which I incurred separately for packing of these goods outside India would liable to be added again on the same concept, that whatever expenses have been incurred prior to goods entering India or reaching the landmass of India are to be included. That's the broad cutoff line or the principle which has been laid, irrespective of who has incurred that amount. There are certain values, Rule 10(1)(b) specifically relates to these values which are to be, or values of goods and services which are to be duly apportioned. So for example, Rule 10(1)(b) gives certain examples specifically which are to be included, irrespective of the fact that whether they are supplied directly or indirectly by the buyer. So for example, if I supply or I give a design to the buyer, to the seller or the manufacturer of goods outside India, that this design is to be used for manufacturing goods of my specification. The rule very clearly says that if the design is developed in India, in that case, the value of design is not to be included because this is developed in India. But if I hire a person who's designing those goods in a country other than the country of exportation, then it will be included. In fact, there is a DRI investigation which we are handling presently, wherein there is an auto component manufacturer in India. That auto component manufacturer procured certain molds from a Chinese company. Now, what should be the design of the product which is ultimately supposed to come out of the molds? That exercise was undertaken by a different country in Japan, by a different company in Japan. DRI is of the view today that unless you pay, that is I, the importer or the manufacturer of these auto components, unless I pay this amount to the design maker or the design manufacturer in Japan, he will not make designs. And if the designs are not made, then the mold manufacturer will not be in a position to make the mold. Therefore, these designs relate to those molds, and the value, whatever value I have paid to the design manufacturer, should be included in the value of molds also for importation into India. That's a dispute which is going on. In our view, this is not includable, but I thought it was important to give an example of this nature, that irrespective of the fact that whether you're paying to the manufacturer or the supplier or any third person, there are certain examples which are specifically listed, which are here. We have listed down specifically. So I was talking about tools and dies and molds, which are here. Or if there is a design work which has been undertaken elsewhere than in India, then it is necessary, and it is necessary for production of the imported goods. This is the clause on which the department is relying upon, the DRI is relying upon, to say that these this so-called design work has been undertaken in a country outside India, in a country other than the country of importation, and unless you make those designs for the finished goods, you will not be, or your mold manufacturer will not be in a position to make the molds. Therefore, value, whatever payments you have made for the services of design charges, which relates to the finished goods and not molds. That's very, very important distinction here. The charges which I have paid are not for designing of molds. It is for designing of the finished goods which I am going to manufacture out of molds. And the DRI is of the view that even those expenses are liable to be included here specifically. There was a case of Associated Cement Company wherein the Supreme Court held that if the intellectual property or the design which is there, anything which is being developed, if that is put on a media, then the value of that media alone should not be liable to pay the duty. The whatever payments are made for the intellectual property should also be liable to pay the duty. For example, if I am importing a software or if I am importing sketches in a CD, I would declare the goods in my bill of entry as the CD, pay the duty on the nominal value of CD, $1, $2, whatever it is. But according to this decision of the Supreme Court, it's not only the value of CD on which you are supposed to pay the duty. The intellectual property which resides in that CD, that is either the sketch or the software, you're supposed to pay duty on the value of that intellectual property also, because your objective is not to import that media. Your objective is to actually import that intellectual property which resides in that media, and media is only a medium to which you are importing. So the goods essentially which are being imported are not CDs, but the intellectual property, and therefore they should be liable to duty. Obviously, situation has changed over a period of time now. Softwares are usually electronically downloaded. So once the goods are electronically downloaded, obviously there is no importation of goods into India, and you would not be liable to pay any duty on the value of software. But in some cases, because of certain practices, we have seen that softwares are electronically downloaded. At the same time, a paper license would be imported into India. That is authorizing that you have downloaded the software, but I'm giving you a license stating that this is an authentic software, and this license would say that you are an authorized user of that particular license. Now, that being a document or a piece of paper, that license would be classifiable under Chapter 49 of the Customs Tariff, which includes documents which transfer right to use of certain goods, IT software, etc. Now, the question is, what should be the value of this paper which is coming? Is it only a paper which is being imported, or it should also include the value of software which has been electronically downloaded by me, and on what amount should I pay customs duties? Obviously, the endeavor of department is always to include whatever values which are possible, add them in the value of imported goods, and demand higher duties from us. Now, these are the specific inclusion in Rule 10(1)(c), and the most disputed point, that is royalties and license fees which are paid by the importer of the goods to either the seller or any third party also at the behest of the seller. So, for example, Microsoft CDs or software, MS Office is being imported into India by a distributor who will distribute this software into India for use either by, say, laptop manufacturers or a purchaser like you and me who will buy these CDs off the shelf, use it in our systems. On sale of each set of CDs, some royalty is transferred by the importer to either Microsoft Corporation or to a third entity also. So Microsoft US engaged an entity in, say, Vietnam for manufacturing of these CDs. Physically, I am importing these CDs from this person who is based out of Vietnam, who's only a replicator. He has no right over the IP which is residing in the CD, but I'm only buying goods physically from him. And as an importer, because I'm purchasing these goods or I'm buying these CDs, I am liable to pay a specific amount of royalty to Microsoft on sale of each set of CDs. I import goods from a different person, but I pay royalty to a different person altogether. In that case also, whether royalty or license fee is to be included in the value of CDs which I am buying from an unrelated person is to be included or not was a question. In a lot of cases, this issue has been raised. There are various permutation combinations which are also possible as to how do you compute this license fee. It could be a fixed amount if the goods are in the nature of finished goods, or if I get some technology on the basis of which I'm manufacturing goods in India. I gave an example. There was an earlier case wherein a complete plant was imported. There are cases. So, for example, Ferodo India, the last judgment which we see here, is the case wherein the royalty was to be paid for technical know-how for manufacturing finished goods in India. And it was computed on the basis of net sale price in India, a specified percentage of net sale price, which was derived from the agreement how net sale price is to be computed, 3% or 4%, whatever is the specific value. You pay that much amount of royalty to the exporter of plant. The question before the Supreme Court was that whether this royalty, which is paid for manufacturing goods in India, and they are not relating to the goods which are being imported by Ferodo, whether they should also be included in the value of the goods or not. So the Supreme Court held that because these activities relates to your post-importation activities, these payments which you are making, the know-how which is procured by you is meant for manufacturing goods in India, and they are not for importation of goods. Therefore, the royalty which is paid will not be included, because the requirement here is that these royalties, they should relate to the imported goods, and they should be paid as a condition of sale of the imported goods, that unless and until you agree to pay this royalty, the seller will not supply goods to you. A condition of this nature would be considered as a condition of sale. In those cases alone, royalty would be includable. But it's a point of debate, and this is where we see most of the disputes coming today. Every company in India, or especially we are talking about subsidiaries of MNC, they will end up paying some or the other kind of royalty because they consider it to be the easiest way of sending money out to their parent companies. So be it usage of IPR, be it usage of trademark, etc., in the name of that, they'll end up paying these royalties. Once these royalties are paid, the question would definitely arise, and we have seen this happening across the brands, howsoever big or small the company is. So, for example, if I start a franchise in India, I take example of Crocs. Crocs are being sold in India, the footwear as we know. Now, for selling those goods in India, obviously I'll have to seek permission from the holding company to allow me to use the trademark which resides in the Crocs brand. Whatever stores I set up, because I'm going to use the trademark, I'm going to use the logo, all those things are there. Now, if I pay any royalty for usage of these rights, or because Crocs has conferred these rights on me, whether I should be paying or including that royalty or license fee in the value of goods which are being imported. A very simple example, but it's a regular example which we keep coming off. Live cases come up on this point. We usually argue that because whatever expenses I have incurred or whatever payments I have made in terms of these royalties and license fees are meant for post-importation activities in India, for sale and distribution of these goods in India, they per se do not relate to imported goods, and therefore they should not be included, is the line of argument which we have succeeded also in some cases. We'll skip this portion. There was a case of Atul Kaushik versus CC Import in India. This basically relates to the example of CD. It was in the case of Oracle. So certain CDs with Oracle software were being imported by the importer in India, Oracle India. The CDs were supplied by Oracle Ireland, and whatever license fee was required to be paid was paid by Oracle India to Oracle US, a third party. In that case also, the tribunal said that though you are importing goods from Oracle Ireland, a different company altogether, but Oracle Ireland will not supply the goods to you unless you continue paying royalties to Oracle US, because all three of you are group entities at the end of the day. You control each other. Oracle US would control you as also Oracle Ireland. So you are group entities, you are related persons. And unless you pay that royalty, Oracle Ireland will not sell goods to you. Therefore, it becomes a condition of sale. This is an example of a condition of sale as to when it becomes necessary for the importer to pay these royalties and license fee either to the supplier of goods or any third person. Then a stipulation of that nature would be considered as condition of sale, and it would be includable in the assessable value. We do have various examples, and a lot of questions would arise as to how do you compute value. So we have I've given a very simple example. Now, if I import a software or a CD once, and at the time of importation, I pay royalty or license fee by saying that I'm going to use this license for only 100 users. I import the CD once, I use that CD for installing in system of those 100 people. Subsequently, over a period of time, my business grows. I still have that CD with me. I say that I want to use the very same CD for installing it in the systems of 100 more people. You allow me the usage and I'll pay you the license fee accordingly. I've already imported the goods, say 2 years, 3 years back. In that case, if I subsequently pay any license fee to the supplier, should I go back to the customs department and say that you reassess the value, you include this value also? Or I will have resort to the argument that at the time of importation, when the goods are being cleared from the customs, the agreement was only for 100 licenses on which I've already paid the duty. Therefore, any subsequent increase or payment of license fee should not be included. We'll have to see it from both perspectives, because this could possibly be used as a sham also by the importers, that at the time of import, they'll say that I'll pay license fee only for 100 or 10. Subsequently, after 2 months, I'll pay license fee for 2,000 more. So how do you value these goods? These are the questions which don't really have a clear cut or a straightforward answer. I'll also give another example, a very, very interesting case. So, which we came across, and we are still struggling to find an appropriate or a proper answer for it. So we all have seen those huge photocopying machines, the multifunction printers which are being imported. So for instance, it could be Canon, it could be any other company. So those multifunction printers are imported. They are installed in your office. As far as the hardware is concerned and the software is concerned, most of these systems are preloaded or fully capable of performing multiple functions. But as a purchaser, I say that I only want to use feature 1, 2, 3, and I'll pay you accordingly. The company agrees, but they make standard products. The system has 10 features in terms of hardware and software, but as a purchaser, I say I only want 3 features at the time of importation. After 6 months, I say, why don't you unlock 2 more features for which I'll pay you separately? I agree to pay that amount because there is already a software which is installed. The supplier can online unlock those systems and I continue to use those 2 more additional features which I am given access to. In this situation, I've already imported the goods. At the time of importation, the goods had all 10 features in terms of software as also hardware. But I paid for those 2 features at a later point in time. In that case, how goods are to be valued? At the time of importation, should the customs value goods by considering that there are 10 features in terms of software and hardware? Or they should restrict it only to those features, 3 features, which I am using? No clear answer to this question. At least the law does not deal with these situations, especially with the development of technology over a period of time, wherein a lot of things can simply be done online in terms of logging into systems, in terms of updates, in terms of upgradations also, by adding more softwares or new patches, etc. So these situations per se as on date are not being contemplated in law. And therefore we come across these questions for which there is no clear answer, because you can't keep. So one possible option could be that you keep the assistance provisional, but you can't keep the assistance provisional forever. As a purchaser, I may at some point in time choose to do it. I may not choose to do it also. So in that case, if I'm going to use those 3 features alone forever, then it does not make any sense to keep the assistance provisional. But if you don't do that and you pay any amount subsequently, would you revise the value and pay the duty? In that case, would the customs say that you should have paid this duty at the time of import, therefore you should pay interest also on this amount today because there is a delayed payment of duty? So these are the questions for which we don't really have a clear answer, either in terms of law or also in terms of jurisprudence which is developed in other countries. So because there are certain, as I mentioned, because our transaction value concept primarily comes from GATT valuation rules, which is there in other countries also. Whenever we come across these questions, we try and look into the jurisprudence which is developed in other countries, be it UK, be it EU, be it US. There also, at least we have not been able to find a very clear answer to this question, which we are still trying to figure out. This is the case of Atul Kaushik, which I was referring to, Oracle case, as we will call it. And they finally held that the license fee on certain imports will not be imported. but on certain cases they were included. Whether the notional value of license fee when not charged to the customer or paid by the importer includable. So as we were looking in rule 10 and 3 and 4 earlier, before we started rule 10, the includables, it said very clearly it has to be on the basis of object and quantifiable data, and it is includable only on the basis of the inclusions which are specifically made in rule 10. Now, if there is a notional value which is attached to a license fee, whether it can be charged or not, in our view, it definitely cannot be. There was a question again in the case of Atul Kaushik, that is the Oracle case, and the court held that there is no provision in the custom valuation rule to include royalty or license fee when the same is not a condition of sale. It becomes very, very important to determine whether payment of an amount is condition of sale or not. It becomes the basic criteria, because if I am paying any amount which is not a condition of sale, then according to rule 10(1)(c), it will not be included in the assessable value. Now, apart from this, there are certain other inclusions also which are specifically provided for in rule 10. That is, value of any part of proceeds or any subsequent resale, etc. So if I enter into agreement with the supplier that as and when I sell these goods in India, I'll pay you 10% over and above the transaction value. I'll pay you 10% more when I sell these goods in India. In that case, as per rule 10(1)(d), this value, which is in the nature of a proceeds of a subsequent resale in India, will also get added, because it was only a deferred payment subject to a particular condition which stands fulfilled now, and therefore it should be added. It's logical in my view. All other payments which are made, a generic rule again, 10(1)(e), which says that all other payments which are made as a condition of sale need not be in the nature of a license fee or a royalty. It could be any payment, but if the payment is in the nature of a condition of sale, that is without fulfillment of this condition or without payment of this amount, if the seller will not sell the goods to the buyer, or if the payment is to be made to any third party also on the instruction of the seller, then that amount becomes includable. And we have seen these cases wherein these amounts are not considered. So we dealt with a matter relating to an alcohol manufacturing company in India. They import, as we call the concentrate. They use that concentrate by distillation process. They manufacture alcohol in India. They bottle it in India and then sell the goods. Now, what should be the company paid for design of the bottle to another company in Sri Lanka? Now, because in bigger companies, you have different departments dealing with different issues. So as far as the designing, etc. is concerned, a procurement team went to the design manufacturer or design maker in Sri Lanka, made that payment of say $60,000 or something. As far as the import of goods is concerned, it was done by a different team, and there was no correlation between these two teams. The import team had no ghost of an idea that a payment of this nature has been made by the procurement team. So therefore, at the time of importation, this value was never included, and it came out in the audit, customs audit. So as you all know, customs department has designated 4 commissioners in India as customs audit. They are based out of Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, and Calcutta. So there is a separate audit commissioner now, and they conduct regular audits every 3 years. They'll send a standard questionnaire, and a set of questions in these questionnaire relates to these rule 10 inclusions, which we saw earlier. They'll ask you specifically, have you paid any royalty? Have you paid any design charges? Have you paid any engineering charges? And if you have paid, whether these have been included in the value of imported goods or not. So when this client of ours received this letter from the audit, we asked them to go and check back if they have made these payments. They said, yes, we have paid these design charges, but we never had any idea that these are supposed to be included in the value of imported goods, because then we never discharge duties on those amounts. And we asked them that you are liable to pay the duty on this amount, and you should go ahead and make those payments. So it's important for them to be very clear on as to what they are liable to pay and what are includable, what are portions can be included. This is a case study which we have referred to in terms of rule 10(1)(d). It basically relates to import of power plant, which are to be replaced after a specific usage. So after 12,500 fired hours of the use of the original parts, these used parts would be exported to the supplier, and replacement parts would be imported, and there would not be any charge for those so-called replacement. Now, whether the import of these parts and goods and re-export would subsequently become a condition of sale or not. So, just to simplify this example a little more, I imported a plant. I'm using that plant. There are some parts which are to be replaced, or they have a specific life. In this case, 12,500 hours. I import replacement parts, but at the same time, I export the so-called wasted parts to the exporter. The revenue was of the contention that the assessee has only declared the differential amount between these two amounts. So if the value of new parts, say, is 100 rupees, whereas the value of the parts which I am exporting to the supplier is 50 rupees, the importer only declared 50 rupees as the value of imported goods, because the rest of the amount was set off. In that case, the revenue was of the department. That what department was of the view, or their argument basically was that the SSC had declared only the differential value of return parts and the parts imported, and 1/3 of the invoice value of the needs to be added. So whatever amount or whatever value related to the wasted parts which has been reduced, according to the department, they should be included in the value of the imported goods. And the Supreme Court finally held that these prices were list price or catalog prices, etc. And the tribunal and the commissioner, wherein the demands were confirmed, basically, were actually wrong in concluding that the invoice price is only an incremental value. So it was established with the help of the usual list prices which are there of the company. So if there's a list price, it will list out what are the price of various parts, etc. So if you have a list price, a standard list price which is there, that can also be used for determining or establishing as to how the value which is being declared before the customs authorities is actually an acceptable value. This actually happened in the case of GMR, a reported judgment of the Supreme Court. There are certain more case studies which I had referred to. In the interest of time, I think I'll skip those. But there is a lot to discuss when it comes to valuation. I was giving that example. I'm sorry, I just kind of skipped my mind. I did not conclude on that ATF example which I was giving. There, the Customs Department came up with a very, very interesting argument. So, the example which I was giving was that Indigo takes out a flight. It recharges the fuel in the country from which it is coming back. After landing into India, for example, it has 200 liters of ATF left. There is no question that 200 liters of ATF would be considered as goods which are imported in India, and Indigo would be liable to pay duty on those goods. The question was that whether Indigo should also pay freight charges, include freight charges in the value of those imported goods, and pay customs duty on those freight charges also. Rule 10(1)(b) of the valuation rule says that if the freight charges are ascertainable, then you pay customs duty on those ascertained freight charges. But if the freight charges are not ascertainable for any reason, then you will deem the freight charges to be the 20% value of the goods, and 20%. So if the value of goods is 100, but you don't know what exactly the freight charges are, you will deem the value of goods to be 120 and then pay duty on that 20. Customs Department was of the view that Indigo is importing these goods, that is ATF, which is resting in the petrol tank of the flight, and it has transported the ATF, which is residual. Whatever freight is there, either Indigo should tell what is the freight cost. If not, then they should pay 20% on the freight value. We argued before the tribunal that one, there is no cost of transportation which has been incurred by Indigo, because when you say cost, it has to be interpreted in terms of how a common person would understand, or a normal businessman of common prudence would understand what is a cost. Cost is something which I incur as a business. So we relied on certain income tax judgments in the context of cost to say what exactly is cost. Cost is something which a businessman of common prudence would understand it to be cost, and which is incurred by it, more importantly. In the case of Indigo, they are not incurring any cost for transportation of that residual fuel in India. They are not even transporting it because I need that fuel to fly my aircraft. There can't be a situation wherein the fuel gets over while the flight is still flying, right? It's not allowed. I mean, I can't do that. More importantly, there are DGCA regulations which says that excess quantum of fuel must be carried by aircrafts at any point in time to ensure that if they take more time, if there is any emergency, etc., they should have excess quantity of fuel. So we argued before the tribunal, the larger bench, last week, and they reserved their order on this issue, that the so-called cost of transportation in this case would be zero. It is ascertainable in this case because we did not want them to go to the question of a situation wherein it is not ascertainable. So according to us, the cost is ascertainable and the cost is zero because I have not made any payment to any party whatsoever with regard to transportation of these goods. Even if you consider that I have transported my own ATF, which is residing in my petrol tank. So the cost is zero, and therefore zero is also an ascertainable amount. It is also a value. And because it is zero, the thumb rule of 20% cannot be invoked in this case, and you should not be demanding duty on the freight cost. We have concluded our submissions before the tribunal. The order has been reserved. Let's hope, and we'll have to see. So, as to how does the order come. This is what I was referring to, which was relied upon by the department. When the cost of transport is not ascertainable, it will be 20% of the FOB value. These are certain thumb rules which have been made by the department for ease of reference, that if actuals are there, you pay it on actuals. If actuals are not there, then you take these as thumb rule. So because we are liable to pay duty on CIF value, cost, insurance, freight, all three components, freight here has been made as 20%. Loading, unloading charges, of course, is 1%. And insurance, if it is not ascertainable, it will be 1.125%. These are to be notionally added to the value of imported goods, and duties are to be discharged on these amounts also. But if you are able to give what are the actuals, then it will always be on actuals, not on these thumb rules. Not transport, freight from the port to ICD not includable. A very, very common example which we have seen is that I import goods at Nhava Sheva. I'm based out of Delhi. There is no seaport here. So I have to get the goods to a dry port here. So ICD Tughlakabad is a dry port. Whatever cost I am incurring from Nhava Sheva to ICD Tughlakabad, that will not be included, because what we saw in the definition of transaction value was that at the time and place of importation, whatever expenses are incurred. And more importantly, in the interpretive notes to Rule 3, there was a specific exclusion for the cost of transportation which is incurred post-importation by the importer. Goods landed in Nhava Sheva, they travel from there to ICD Tughlakabad. Even if I'm filing bill of entry here, the goods have already reached the landmass of India. The only thing which is pending is the assessment of goods. Nevertheless, they have crossed the customs frontier. So therefore, this value will not be included. Of course, the cost of transport will also include ship demurrage charges and chartered vessel bar charges, etc., because they are still paid by the buyer before the goods are cleared. Now, coming to the exclusions from the transaction value, there are some post-importation expenses, as we are discussing, duties and taxes. Also, the expenses which the buyer is incurring on his own account, they will not be included in the assessable value. So whatever expenses I am incurring as a buyer on my own goods or for my own goods, they'll not be included. And here are the few examples which are given. Not something very, very elegant, so we don't really have to spend more time on this. Then these were some case studies, basically judgments. We primarily rely on judgments as to how the goods which are imported by OE suppliers as pairs at different prices. We'll come to this issue when we see the residual methods of valuation. Here being the first one, the identical good method. Now, as of now, we have been discussing everything on the basis of transaction value, that whatever value I declare, that is to be accepted by the department. In case of related parties, it has to be dealt with separately. But in cases where the transaction value is rejected on any of the grounds, then what are the alternative options available for us in terms of valuation rules to value our goods? First one being the identical goods method. Here they first define what are identical goods, and the goods would be considered as identical goods if they are same in all respect, including physical characteristics, quality and reputation. They should be produced in the same country from which I imported my goods which are under question, and they should be produced by the same manufacturer. So I am importing my goods. For some reason, my value is rejected. But if another person is importing the very same goods manufactured by the very same supplier or manufacturer, whatever price he is paying can be taken as the price of identical goods, and my goods can be assessed or valued on the basis of these identical goods. While it appears to be useful on the face of it, it actually is. It is also used to by the department to reject the value by saying that you're importing goods at a lower value, whereas some other importer is importing goods at a higher value. So I will reject your value, and these goods being identical, I will take the value of the or I'll take value of the goods which are higher as compared to yours. In those cases, we would usually argue that a transaction value is a thumb rule. It is sacrosanct between me and the exporter, unless and until you are able to reject the transaction value, for which there is a specific rule, Rule 12. We'll come to it in a while. Unless department has a clear reason for rejection of my transaction value, it can't be discarded solely on the basis that somebody else is importing at a higher value. There could be n number of reasons between difference in price. I could be a long-standing customer for that supplier. The quantities which I'm importing could be much higher. I have a better negotiating power with the customer, with the supplier. There could be different reasons, and because of existence of these reasons, I would be entitled to argue that I will pay duty on the transaction value which is untainted, irrespective of the fact that what others are importing at. I'm not concerned with that. So identical goods, as I mentioned, they are defined in a particular way. This is one of the methods of valuation. And when it comes to the customs valuation rules and these alternatives, according to the rules and various Supreme Court judgments, they are to be used in the same sequence in which they are provided. So Rule 4 deals with identical goods, then Rule 5 deals with similar goods. So there is a slight difference between similar goods and identical goods. You may not be able to match or find an exact match, and therefore you have an option of thereafter going to the concept of similar goods and use the transaction value of similar goods, which are defined little differently. They must have like characteristics, components, material, perform the same function, commercially interchangeable. A very important trait. And this is the main distinction between similar goods and identical goods. Obviously, they should still be produced in the same country by the same person. And if the goods are not produced, then some other person should also produce those goods at least. Of course, the country of importation should be same, and they must be sold for export to the same country. So I can't be taking prices at which the same supplier is supplying goods to a third country purchaser. It has to be the standard or the thumb rule which has to be taken in these cases should be the value which is being charged by the same supplier to another purchaser in India, because we have to see two individuals or two importers who are based in India so as to try and bring them at the same commercial levels, etc. Then the goods must also be exported at or about the same time of the goods being valued. This is a very important concept. We call it the concept of contemporaneous imports. So because of the dynamic marketing conditions, some goods which are imported say 2 years back or 1 year back also, today's goods can't be valued on the basis of these old imports. They should be at or about the same time. That is, they should be very near in terms of importation, because over a period of few months or a few years, the prices can change significantly. We know how mobile phones were imported at one point in time, what were the prices which were paying for mobile phones, and how the prices have dropped over a period of time because of various criteria. So today, if I'm importing a phone, it can't be valued on the basis of the price which was charged 1 year or 2 years back by the same supplier. It can't be. It doesn't make any sense because prices keep fluctuating because of various economic conditions and reasons. So it should be at or about the same price. The comparative figure which you are taking, those imports should be at or about the same time. There is no clear criteria, but courts have interpreted this to be a gap of a few months at the most, not beyond 4 to 5 months for sure. If you don't have any option in terms of identical or similar goods, then we resort to this method, which is called the deductive method. TNMM, it basically relates to that. And that the transaction value on the unit sale price is to be computed backwards. So I'll take the price at which I am selling the goods in India, I go backwards, and I'll do various deductions to arrive at the deemed import value. So whatever expenditure I am able to justify from my sale price in India in terms of commission, in terms of cost of transport, profits, general expenses, marketing expenses, taxes which I am payable, they can all be reduced or deducted to arrive at the deemed import value. Obviously, when I'm saying profits, general expenses, marketing expenses, one, they should be quantifiable, and I should be in a position to justify that this is the quantum of expenditure which I'm attributing to these imported goods. I could be incurring a lot of common expenditure for various imported goods or for goods which I'm manufacturing locally and selling them. So there has to be a proportionality. There has to be a consistency as to how do I reach those figures, and I will have to justify. The onus is on me to justify as to why I want to deduct a particular amount of expenses as general expenses, and how do I ensure that these expenses are basically meant for these very goods. So that proportionality is very, very important to be established, and that onus is on the importer to justify. Then, of course, if the resale price of identical or similar goods is not available, then we go back to the option of sale price of the imported goods after processing less the cost of processing. So, if depending on what all activities are being undertaken in India, it could be a job work also which you are undertaking, getting it done through a job worker, those processing and all will have to be reduced accordingly. The next method for valuation, of course, is the computed value method, wherein you do a cost computation. For this, of course, you will need a lot of support from your supplier, because you need all that information from the supplier. What is the value which the supplier or what is the cost which the supplier has incurred for manufacturing of these goods is to be determined in these cases, wherein apart from the computed value, the cost which the manufacturer has incurred, there are certain more additions which are to be done. Fabrication charges, cost of container, packing. We saw specifically earlier that these are to be included specifically. Then the computed value also needs to include appropriate values towards various services like engineering, drawing. So you arrive at the computed value and you top up that value on the basis of other inclusions which we saw earlier in Rule 10. What exactly is computed value? We have listed that is the cost of material, processing, profit and general expenses. Now, how much quantum of profit can be allowed, not be allowed, it depends again on the industry, on the usual practice in that industry, and these are required to be duly, I would say, proved either by cost accountant certificates or CA certificates, more importantly, to establish. So it's a complete number game in this case, which per se as a lawyer is not my domain. Rather, I would say this is your domain. This is where the role of chartered accountants come to a greater extent, because when it comes to this number game, it's very, very important for us to see how are we looking at those numbers, what are the inclusions, what are the exclusions, and more importantly, or rather most importantly, how would we in a position to justify that amount which has been taken relates to these goods and justifiable. Then just like any other taxation provision, we have this so-called residuary method, or as we call them, the best judgment method, when none of the previous methods, that is the identical goods, similar goods, computed value, deducted value, is possible because of various reasons. Then in that case, so the department would usually resort to this so-called best judgment method to say that your value is incorrect because of some random data which I have. I'll take this as the value and take that as a standard for demanding duty. Of of course, this best judgment method also has some restrictions that it should definitely be reasonable, and the rule itself provides that the price shall not exceed the price at which such or like goods are ordinarily sold or offered for sale or delivery in the time of place importation when the buyer and the seller are delivered. The same concept of transaction value. But that does not make much sense, honestly, because if this price was available, then that can be taken otherwise also. So there's no requirement of one coming to the best judgment method in this case. There are some specific restrictions on the basis of which assessable value can't be based under this specific method of residuary method of valuation. That irrespective of what my sale price is, I import some goods at 100 rupees, but I'm able to sell those goods at 1000 rupees. So we see there are a lot of cosmetic companies or companies which are basically multi-level marketing companies. They would import goods at very, very low value, and because of various levels of distribution which are involved, various people are there in between who would have their own profit margins, there will be expenses, etc. The goods are ultimately sold at a very high value. In those cases, customs, in fact, DRI has been investigating those matters recently in Nhava Sheva again, wherein they are saying that you are declaring 100 rupees as value of a lipstick, whereas this lipstick is the MRP which you are declaring on the very same lipstick at the time of importation is 800 rupees, and the lipstick is ultimately being sold at 400 rupees. So if you are selling a lipstick at 400 rupees, having MRP of 800, how do you say that you are justified in declaring 100 rupees as the transaction value? There is no other basis for the department to question the transaction value in that case. There is no allegation that the person from whom I'm buying those goods is my related person, or they're not able to establish that I have made any payments by non-banking channels, etc. But despite having a clear transaction value, it is being disputed solely on the basis of what is the subsequent sale price in India, which according to us is definitely not a relevant criteria. If I'm able to earn more profits out of it, that does not mean that I should end up paying more custom duty to the department at the time of importation. If the value between me and my supplier is clear, untainted, it becomes sacrosanct. It can't be touched on these grounds which are listed here. That is, any system which provides for acceptance of a higher of the two alternative prices. Somebody, as I gave an example, somebody else is importing at a higher price, because of which I can't be put at a detriment and I can't be asked to pay duties on a higher value. What is the selling price of the same goods in the country of export? I'm not concerned with that. I should not be. I should be concerned with what price I am paying. That's all. The cost of production, other than the computed method, value method, which have been determined for identical similar goods. So when it's a very, very important thing to note that when we resort to the identical and similar goods method of valuation, it should be on the basis of an accepted price. It should not be a price which the customs has inflated because of certain reasons. And then they say that this is the price, though I have inflated it because of some reasons, these goods are still identical or similar to you, and therefore I'll take it as a standard. No, that's not allowed. Obviously, there can't be a minimum customs value or any fictional prices which can be taken by the department. Whatever is my transaction value, I am importing irrespective of the fact what the department may think ought to be or should be the right value. The example of lipstick which I gave. Now, these were the broad methods of valuation. Apart from this, Rule 12 basically confers an obligation on the importers to give a truthful declaration with regard to the value. And Rule 12 is the one which confers a right on the department for rejection of transaction value when they have a doubt over the truthfulness or accuracy of the declared value by the importer. In this case alone, they can reject the transaction value. And customs department invariably in all cases, obviously they will have to refer to this specific rule for rejecting the transaction value. So it became a bone of contention as to when can the customs department entertain a doubt about the truth or accuracy, because this becomes a discretionary power of the department. They will not tell us anything. They will not show any data to us, but they will, in their own whims and fancies, will say that I have a doubt about your transaction value, therefore I am rejecting it. There can't be an unbridled power like this conferred to the department. Otherwise, every importer would be harassed to the extent possible. Now, because of this issue, in the case of Century Metal recycling, the Honorable Supreme Court laid down a criteria as to how Rule 12 is to be read and what are the requirements of Rule 12. It's very, very important to note these requirements which have been laid out by the Supreme Court. Then we'll go through this one by one, because this becomes the entry point for the Customs Department to dispute the value. If at this threshold itself we are able to stop them, then the entire litigation can be stopped. But if you're not able to stop them here, then the litigation starts, and where will it end today? Nobody knows. Depending on the quantum, depending on the amounts, etc., most of the matters will end up in the Supreme Court. And in fact, as far as customs is concerned, unlike excise or service tax, there is no quantum which can be ascertained when it comes to the departmental appeals. As we know, there is a litigation policy which is being used by the government of India to say that if a particular matter does not have a specific quantum, say more than 50 lakhs or more than 1 crore of demand, they will not file appeals. The department will not file appeals. So that is applicable only in case of excise and service tax. It does not apply in case of customs. So irrespective of what is the quantum of dispute, department does continue to file appeals, even if it's a small amount of 4 lakhs, 5 lakh, 10 lakh rupees also. So it becomes important for us to stop them at this threshold if possible. The Supreme Court says that the proper officer should have a reasonable doubt on the transaction value. What is this reasonable doubt? How this reasonable doubt is to be confirmed, etc. That all is also dealt with by separately by the department. If he has any reasonable doubt, then he must seek further information from the department, from the importer. And on receipt of some information, whatever is sought, the officer has to decide whether the reasonable doubt on the transaction value continues or not. If it does not continue, if the importer is in a position to satisfy with the answers that the transaction value declared is correct, the officer must declare the transaction value. However, if the information which has been submitted by the importer is not sufficient for the officer, then the transaction value can be rejected, and it has to be determined in terms of Rule 429, which we saw earlier, that is identical, similar, directive value, computed value methods. This is an important clause, and this and a couple of more clauses which will come after that are very, very crucial. The proper officer should raise doubts on certain reasons for including the grounds specified in A to F of clause 3 of the explanation. We are referring to as to when the doubts can be raised. So there are certain conditions which are laid down in Rule 12 specifically, and if the transaction falls within any of those clauses, then alone there can be a ground. More importantly, the proper officer has to furnish and intimate in writing the grounds of doubting the truth or accuracy of the transaction value if the importer asks so. Today, I would say 99% of the importers are not aware of this position of law which the Supreme Court has laid down. If the officer is disputing that the value is incorrect, no importer would go to the officer and ask him as to why are you questioning this? What is the basis? And you tell me it in writing. Though this is a law laid down by the Supreme Court, it's a law of the country in terms of articles of the Constitution, but importers don't do it because they're not aware. This clause G is not provided for in any provision of law. It's a code-laid law. Nevertheless, it's there, and the customs officer are duty bound to give that information. They will have to tell you the reasons as to why they are. If they don't do it, then the question of discretion creeps in, which leads to whatever they wish to do, they will do. They will not tell you the reasons also, and they will reject your transaction value. The proper officer has to record reasons in writing, which have to be communicated when requested. So you will have to ask for it that please let me know what is the reason, what is the basis for you to reject the value. I will try and address it. If I'm not able to satisfy you with my justification, might as well go ahead and reject, determine in terms of Rule 429. And then the importer has to be given an opportunity of hearing also before it is finally deciding to reject the value. In our experience, I've seen either people are not aware of it, or they think that if they go and questions the customs department, it will hurt their ego. I am a regular importer. I can't be going to my officer, assessing officer, and asking this, even if he wants to do, I'll let him do. Sir, रोज का काम है, पानी में रह के मगर से बैर कौन करेगा? That's the usual attitude which we have seen. So we have to take a pragmatic view also, that while we would want to assert our rights, we'll have to see how practical that option is for the importer, because he has to deal with the same officer day in and day out, and then you can't be expecting him to continue fighting with the officer unnecessarily. We know how these officers can make your life miserable by stopping imports. They'll not allow clearances. They'll take a few days to clear. You will end up incurring various costs. You will not be in a position to service your customers in India if they are dependent on the goods and all. So all these aspects have to be kept in mind before advising the clients as to what is the right recourse. There is an extent to which you can bend your back. There is an extent to which you can bow down before the officers if it is required. But at the same time, you should know what your rights are. Unless your clients are conveyed what their rights are, they will not be in a position to take an informed decision. That's the most important thing which should happen. Even if I'm agreeing to what the department is saying, I should know these are my rights, and I am making this as a conscious choice, knowing well what my rights are. It's very, very important for us to sensitize, as professional, for us to sensitize the clients. I personally think, and we as a matter of policy also as a firm, we don't believe that we should be taking decisions for the clients. They are supposed to take a decision, but before they take any decision in terms of questioning, doubting, fighting with the department, they should be made aware what are the pros, what are the cons, and you take a decision accordingly, knowing well. Because if I fail in that job, tomorrow something goes wrong, I will be responsible for that customer, for that client. I should not be doing that. With that, I think I'll conclude my presentation for today, sir. And if there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to take it.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. There are a few questions.
All right.
Sir, what if the consideration is variable, which is payable based on the actual installation or performance of the product or goods imported into India?
Okay. So when you say that the consideration is variable, that is, if the goods, the contract would lay down these stipulations that if the goods are in a position to give, say, an output of a specified range, I'll pay you this much. If the goods are in a position to pay a different output, so it usually happens in, I would say, it's a regular thing which happens, especially in cases of ores, etc., wherein you import ore, and the supplier would say that the ore would have this much quantity of metal based on some certificates, etc. And if there is a limited variation, then it will definitely get through. But if the variation is huge or high, and there is a lot of variation, then in those cases, the customs may not even accept the transaction value, because the transaction value at the time of importation is not stable or determined. You don't even know what your transaction value is. It is contingent on certain tests which may need to be there, or if we are, say, for example, talking about import of a plant, and the supplier says the plant has the capacity of a specific amount of output, but that takes time. Over a period of 2 years, 3 years, you will be in a position to determine. So till the time, if there is a deferred payment, there is a high likelihood that in that case, the customs would not accept the transaction value, because there is no transaction value in this case. It is variable, as you yourself rightly said. So there will be a problem in that case, and in that case, they will resort to other methods of valuation. That if a similar plant has been imported by somebody from the same buyer, identical similar, it is highly unlikely that similar plants would have been imported. It is not a case wherein deductive method can be applied, because deductive method is usually meant for those goods which are resold in India. You count it from backwards calculation. So usually in this case, the computed method value would be used.
Okay. Second thing, sir. Second question is, suppose my supplier has sent me some free samples. I'm not paying anything for that. If I like it, then I will place the order in future. I may or may not place the order.
Correct.
In that case, do I supposed to pay custom duty on that free sample which I have imported into India?
When it comes to import of goods, we'll have to be clear in our minds that irrespective of the fact that whether you're paying anything or not to the supplier. So you gave an example of free samples. There are imports of gifts also. So there is a relative of mine who stays out of India. He is giving me a gift.
Okay.
In that case, there is no transaction value. There is no sale and purchase. But customs duty is liable to be paid on the act of importation. The taxable event is import of goods into India. So irrespective of the fact whether there is any price or not, the goods would still be liable to pay duties and by resorting to other methods of valuation. Of course, when it comes to business, in terms of baggage rules, in terms of import by post and all, there are some limited quantum imports allowed duty free. That if the value of the goods is below a specified threshold, then you would not be liable to pay any duties. Because in the name of samples, people may continue to import on a regular basis that these are samples if something is not imported on a regular basis. So in fact, we had a case of similar nature wherein Amazon imported about 800 Kindles in India and declared it to be a sample because they were said we have to give these samples to various distributors in India. They will display these samples on their shops so that purchasers can come and purchase those and look at the customers can come and have a look at those samples. And once the business will flourish, I'm talking about the time when Kindle was introduced recently, way back in, I would say about 2004 or 5. It was not a regular import. But the customs rejected that. They said, you are calling it sample for your distributors, for your customers, etc. But it's a commercial import for you. So depending on that threshold, the moment you breach the threshold, it will not be allowed. And we'll have to resort to other rules of valuation for determining what the transaction value is, irrespective of the fact whether you are paying anything for it or not.
Okay. Okay. Sir, in GST, we have a sale on approval concept. Is there any concept in custom whereby my supplier send me the goods on approval basis, and if I approve, then only I pay custom duty? Is there any mechanism?
No, sir. As I mentioned, as far as customs is concerned, the duty liability arises the moment goods cross the customs frontier of India. So, irrespective of the fact that whether you are going to keep the goods or not, you would be liable to pay customs duties at the time of importation, even if you don't approve them at a later point in time. Of course, we have a parallel mechanism in terms of duty drawback that if you re-export the goods out of India, then you would be entitled to avail duty drawback of a certain percentage of the value. In fact, there is another provision in Customs Act, Section 26A, which says that you would be entitled to refund of 100% of your duties if the goods which you have imported, they are not as per your specification or if they are defective. So there are other methods which are provided for taking refund of the duties, but at the time of importation, you would be liable to pay the duties.
Okay, okay, understood. Okay, sir, that's what the question we have. Now, on behalf of Ahmedabad branch of WIRC, I express my sincere thanks for accepting our invite and delivering the lecture, sir. We are very much thankful to you, sir. It was a wonderful lecture and we really enjoyed it. We very well understood the concept of valuation. At least we know the insight and gray area where we have to be alert during our regular course of consultations. And I request on behalf of Ahmedabad branch, as and when we do the virtual, after that we do the next session that we are planning for industry-wise seminars. During that also we will approach you, sir. It was a nice experience and we are thankful. Thank you very much, sir.
Glad, sir, and thank you. I'm extremely glad that I got this opportunity, and I consider myself lucky to associate with a reputed organization like yours. I understand that this is a little complicated concept, but the idea is to give a broad overview as to where all issues can come. Depending on facts of each case, matters, etc., we'll have to get into intricacies. But my objective was to sensitize about the areas of disputes which we have been seeing over a period of time, and you in turn, therefore, can sensitize your clients also accordingly.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It is.
Thank you for extending this opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.